Thank you. I am well aware that the faster I talk, the sooner we can all have a pint. So that said, I do want to do something a little bit different. I want to slow things down a bit after all of this that we have learned these past 2 days, and do a little visualization. So bear with me here. This won't take very long, but try this. Imagine being in a scene like this. You're in a little boat, like a canoe or a kayak. You're paddling on a lake. Sun is just rising. It's very quiet. Mist on the water, very beautiful. And then there's a thud and a splash, and the boat flips over, and you're in the water. And you're gasping for breath, and you get up above the surface, and you look around, and what you see, that a couple of teenagers have snuck up behind you, flipped your boat over, they're pointing at you and laughing, and then they swim off. How would you feel in that situation? What emotion do you think you would experience? What do you think? I'll pick on you in the front. What do you think? Anger, good. Anything else? Would anybody be frightened, maybe? Seeking vengeance, maybe? So let's try this again, right? Okay, if we're back in the boat, and it's quiet, and the sun is rising, and again, a thud, and you flip over, and you're in the water, and you come up, and you're gasping for air. And you look, and it is a piece of driftwood that your boat has run into and you flipped over. Now what emotion do you think you might feel? Anybody? Sorry? Shame. Good one. Anything else? Little embarrassment, frustration, maybe, something like that. You could actually not experience much of an emotional response to that at all. And the point that I really want to make here is that in these two circumstances, we immediately have a fight or flight response. And that's natural, and that's very normal, and it is this big surge of emotions that can act as information that we can use to make a decision about how we feel and how we act. And that is a skill that we can master over time. This idea that anything can happen to us and that we'll have an immediate emotional response, but then can choose how we want to proceed, and not just have that emotional response become our reality. And that skill is called equanimity. Equanimity is this idea of a state of emotional stability, especially in a difficult situation. You may have heard it called grace under pressure. And I want to talk about how this applies not only to us in our work that we do in technology, but also how we can work together as teams in this state of equanimity and build that as a way of being more successful with the work that we do. To take all the technology that we've been learning about these past 2 days, put it into action in a way that'll be more likely to succeed by working in teams with this kind of quality. So I want to tell you a story about this, about something that happened to me a few years back. It was December. I remember that because it was 6:24 in the morning, and I woke up and it was still dark. It was much earlier than I normally wake up. And I woke up to the sound of splashing water, which was unusual. Don't live near water. So I followed the sound into the bathroom, and this is what I found. So the good news is I know who this is. The bad news is that he was on his 4th loo roll, just cramming him in there. So there's an immediate sort of like, as a parent, equanimity, okay, I'm going to sort this problem out. But the fact, so we got this sorted out, went downstairs, had breakfast, and what I normally do immediately after breakfast is sort of check in on how the team was doing. I was working at Typekit at the time, and I don't think this thing is going to work for me anymore. So let's see. I was working for Typekit at the time, and the team was really busy already. I was in the chat room, and lots was going on. It was early for that kind of activity, and it turns out something very bad was happening. I popped over to the systems that we use, or the monitors that we use to keep track of all of our systems, and I found a graph that looked like this. I don't know how much you know about data visualization, but this is a chart of something going pretty well, then something happening, and then things going really, really poorly all of a sudden. I'll give you a clue. Look for the red. So So to understand what's happening in this chart, let me tell you just the tiniest bit about the product. So the product allows you to connect web fonts to your web pages through CSS, a little bit of JavaScript. All the fonts are hosted centrally and then spread out to all of the websites that they're hosted on. You come through and you choose one of the fonts, and if you want to hook up to your website, you get this interface like this, some CSS selectors and stuff. And then, most importantly, you push that green button. That green button that says Publish. Behind the scenes, a little magic happens, right? We take some fonts and a little bit of code and a little bit of database configuration stuff and kind of mix it all together into a thing that we metaphorically would call a kit. That's important because this kit then, this bundle of code and fonts, gets pushed out to something called a CDN, a content distribution network. And what that means is the one kit goes over to a server in this network and then gets populated out all over the world. And this is really important because in just the last presentation we heard how important performance is. And it turns out the speed of light is not nearly fast enough for our perception of speed. So we have to push all of our content all around the world so it's very physically close to the people who are trying to view a website. All right, so this chart, then, are the number of times people have clicked that publish button and made a kit, but have not yet been pushed to the CDN. So this is a queue of kits waiting to be published. In other words, there's a user experience of people pushing that button, going to their website, reloading the page, pushing the button again because the font's not there, and it's going over and over again, and they're pushing the button more and more. Kits are piling up. Nothing is getting out. It feels like type gets broken. So we get into the office in the morning and have our morning stand-up, which is really just triage of what is happening in this problem. The developers have kind of identified the source of the problem, but not the actual any sorts of solutions to the problems. And that is that we have been overwhelmed by new traffic overnight because a partner of ours has just launched and has a significantly amount of traffic. 10, 15 times more traffic than we have ever seen in the system. It's causing our servers to sort of buckle, and there's a problem there. So this is the partner. It's called About.me. They do very simple one-page personal websites. We did a deal with them so that when you're building your one-page profile on About.me, you could choose the different font that you want. And it turns out a lot of people are doing that today. So I call the CEO, who we had done the partnership with, and I'm like, you guys are doing a lot of traffic. And he's like, yeah, we launched today. I'm like, that's awesome. It would have been nice to know that you were going to do that, but congratulations, good job. So yeah, they opened with 40,000 people, and he's like, yeah, we've noticed the fonts are a little slow today. I'm like, yep, we're working on it. Absolutely no problem. We'll have it sorted out any minute now. He's like, well, that's good news, because we have another sort of announcement that's coming up on Monday. Even though we've just launched, we're actually getting acquired by AOL. And so we're going to have press in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and TechCrunch, and it's going to be huge. So you probably get a little extra traffic from that as well. Whew. So this is probably a good time to remind all of you just how small Silicon Valley is as well, because the CEO of About.me, turns out, was also an investor for the firm that invested in Typekit. In fact, he led the investment. His name is Tony. He was on my board. So in fact, he's actually sort of my boss, if you think about the way investments and startups work. And so I am talking to him about this problem and how it's going to be fixed. And in the back of my mind, all I'm thinking about is, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. And when I start to think about the future of my company, I'm sort of thinking about this. So, like I said, it's December. It's actually the weekend before the holiday break. And half of my team is getting ready to go to Tahoe to go snowboarding, and everybody has plans. And this is one of those moments where you kind of sit down with the team and you say, you know, all the crazy, awesome benefits of working for a startup, like how quickly you can solve user problems and write code that gets out in front of people. All of those things are awesome. But this is part of it. With that awesomeness comes this responsibility. And so we all sort of said, okay, we're canceling our plans, and we're sort of hunkering down for the weekend to figure out how to solve this problem. And so the first thing we did was put some structure around it. We had 3 days. We had Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We would identify the problem as clearly as we possibly could. on the first day. The second day, we would then build a solution to try to solve the problem that we had identified. On the third day, we would integrate and deploy all of that, and that would essentially be the plan. So everybody sort of knew what the immediate scope of what they would be working on. We then very quickly sequestered the team. I mean, I don't think websites are really rocket science, but there's a lot we can learn from how they do their work to how we approach, especially in times of sort of quote-unquote crisis. So we totally sequestered the team. That means the engineers that were going to be working on this were not going to be bothered by anyone. In fact, nobody was allowed into the conference room that they were in. They were only allowed to come out and report information, which helped them tremendously because they didn't have people looking over their shoulder and saying, is it up yet? Is it up yet? Is it up yet? To that end, I made it very clear that we would remove the business decisions from solving the tech problems. They didn't have to worry about customer support. They didn't have to worry about the severity of the relationship with our partnerships or anything. All they had to do was solve the technical problems. And then finally, moral support, of course, right? So this could not be a more San Francisco startup fridge. There's nothing but microbrew and soy milk. But that's what they needed, and that's what they got. So then we wait. And these are the moments, right, where that sense of equanimity, this unbelievable amount of anxiety that's coming from this panicky situation. We did that by setting up conditions for success. And what I mean by that is really using structure as a way of managing this anxiety. Here's a set of emotions that are coming up. What can we do to use the information from those emotions and interpret them as a way of moving forward in a structured way? So yeah, equanimity. So on that first day, we did identify the problem. And that was that the publishing that we were doing was working just fine. And in fact, the bandwidth between us and that origin server, that's that server at the CDN that takes our content and pushes it out, the bandwidth between us, the connections between us were fine too. It's just that the origin server was bouncing all of the kits and just sort of dropping them on the floor. So that's where we sort of caught our first break, because we decided we would write our own origin server and set it in front of the CDN and skip their integrated system entirely. And we had already kind of spec'd out a program to do that because we wanted some more dynamic features and to be able to do that, to have more control over that kind of stuff. So we had a plan. The problem is the plan was about 8 weeks long, and we were going to do it on Saturday. So when you hear people talk in the startup world about minimum viable product, this was as minimum as we could possibly be and still viable. But they worked on it. They worked on it through the night, set everything up, tested it out, and then set it to run on that now enormous hundreds of thousands of kits in the queue. And we went to sleep for the first time. And in the morning, we woke up to see that the queue had been chewed away, was gone, that we were back up to normal, and that what was causing us that sort of 10 or 15 times the traffic that was causing us all this outage was now sort of a new normal for the systems that they had built. This led, of course, to months of work re-architecting the system and building up those systems to be more robust and reliable. But the following Monday when they made the announcement, fonts were on the pages, and the engineers behind it were really very proud. Paul, who wrote this tweet right after that, now runs engineering for the platform at Slack. But he said, yeah, on Wednesday we decided there was no way that we would get the project done before the end of January, and we launched it this afternoon. It's kind of pride that I think comes from these sorts of situations. So what do we learn from all of this? Well, the first thing is that everything we build breaks. Everything is connected to everything else. And there are times when unusual storms hit data centers right in the middle of a product deploy. And the lights blink out and things break and we have no control over it. And that doesn't matter to our users. They simply see their content not going to the places it's supposed to be going, and they're frustrated. So everything is connected. And everything can break. We have to design for that. We have to anticipate that in our teams and in our systems at all times. The other thing is that, and this is something I've been thinking about for a long, long time in my career, and that is that everything is user experience. And that's not just the stuff that we see in the screens that we build and design. And it's the back-end systems, and it's the DevOps that we set up, and it's the security systems that we built, and it's the contracts that we have with our partners and everything. All of that contributes to the user experience. And as designers, I see increasingly people pushing out of the traditional role of sitting in Sketch or Photoshop all day and moving into more and more positions of leadership and authority to be able to have the impact that we want on the systems and the user experiences that result from them. But what I wanted to talk about for the rest of the time that we have here together is that teams can thrive with this sense of equanimity, and what can we do to build that? So I found a really, really interesting study that happened a while back. It was written up in the New York Times about this project called Project Aristotle that was happening at Google. It was put on by their HR department. They're trying to figure out what were the qualities of the teams at Google that made them more successful, because they had data showing that teams all operated at different levels. And they wanted to see what can we learn from any of the data that comes out of these teams so that we can try to replicate the success and have more teams be more productive. They did countless numbers, like angles on the data, as you can imagine. It's what Google does and what they do so well. And the only thing that they found that was consistent between the successful teams in this company that is perhaps the epitome of computer science in the world today, the only consistency between the successful teams, a sense of psychological safety among all of the team members. And the way that they found that that was expressed, that psychological safety, was the ability for any team member at any time to be able to speak up and, in their language, have a sense of confidence that the team would not embarrass, reject, or punish them for doing so. I find that remarkable. That in the most technologically sophisticated company in the world, feeling safe is the best way to be successful. I don't think we learn this in business school. I think most of the way that we learn how business works are based on methodologies that were developed when work looked like this. You can see way up there in the corner, the guy with the stopwatch writing on the clipboard there, the manager. And his primary concern is productivity and getting the most out of every moment that they are paying the employee. Well, that stuff doesn't work anymore. In fact, I don't think there's much that we can learn from sort of business administration for the way that we have creative teams working together. I like to look, for example, at how very creative teams work, for example, in Hollywood. So Steven Soderbergh is a director. You've probably seen many of his films. Fantastic, and I'm a big fan of him. I read an interview with him where he was talking about his process of working with teams. He said some people believe tension is a good creative tool. I am not one of those people. He's a man after my own heart. What he went on to say was that I'm not trying to control the people on his team, his actors and his technical crew, but looking to amplify whatever it is about them that I find compelling. Right? That's a leadership style that creates this environment, this creative environment that he likes to call very relaxed but focused. So that creative environment, it's not, fancy startup offices with free beer and lunch brought in every day. What I'm talking about are qualities of a team like shared values and safety and camaraderie and trust. The sorts of things that can make people get that sense of psychological safety. So I want to talk about a few things that we did with that last team I worked with the Typekit team, which we grew from 4 of us that just start the company to now they're at Adobe, they're about 70 people. And to show some of the learnings that we had from our process to help foster this sort of creative environment. I want to do that by talking about some of the meetings that we held. This is how I generally feel about meetings. That if you're tired of working alone and you hate decision making, the meeting is perfect. You get to show charts and feel important and point with a stick and all sorts of things. This is the kind of impression that and certainly when I was working at Adobe, oh my goodness, what a meeting-driven culture. But our sort of rejection of all of this, like these seemingly chunks of time wasted in our schedule, we felt that we could use as opportunities to actually get work done together. So here's just a few of them. The first one is what I alluded to earlier, which is that morning stand-up. So we did this. They continue to do it today. Like I said, from 4 people all the way up to 60, 70 people. We reinvented it continuously, but every single day, the entire company met for 15 minutes at 10 o'clock in the morning, or actually it was modeled after, I don't know if any of you have seen it, it's an American TV show called Hill Street Blues from the 80s, which is a cop show, and every single episode started with the sergeant in the department doing the morning briefing, saying, here's what's going on, we're having more crime in the Upper West Side, and watch out for this, and watch out for that. And he would sort of run down everything that was happening, and it would sort of set up the plot for the rest of the show. But the sense of a morning sort of, everybody grabs coffee, sits down. If it's longer than 15 minutes, we're doing it wrong, and we're just gonna go through very quickly the status of each project, a quick check with customer support, a quick check with sales and partnerships, and we're just going to get a sense what's going on today as a way of starting and communicating and making sure nobody ever feels completely out of the loop. So, like I said, actually it would start at 10:05. I don't know why. That must be some weird psychology that when we started a meeting at 10:05, nobody was ever late. If we started it at 10, never got started until 20 minutes later. So, I don't know. Make of that what you will. But it worked. Everybody in the company came every day. Salespeople, office manager, all the developers and product people, everybody, every day for this quick readout, and nobody can talk. Now, I realize that's the antithesis of what I've said about everybody feeling free to speak, but this was an opportunity to get everybody on the same page as equals. But if we turned it into a meeting where there was decision-making and problem solving and stuff like that, we would never get out of the meeting. Right? We would stay there and try to solve the problems the entire time. So we literally no problem solving in this meeting. Everything was taken offline. But all of the problems were raised and addressed. The leaders of each project and of each department would give their quick readout, and everybody would know what was going on. People ask me about tools all the time and project management tools. For the first 4 years of the company, we used an email. And I would copy yesterday's and paste it into a new one and make edits in it and send it out to everybody in the company. And that was literally the extent of our product management. We use, I don't know what they use now. We were using Trello for a while, and I think they may have moved to Asana. But those tools are as particular to a team's personality and culture as they can be. And so that stuff changes all the time. So, the second meeting, the product review. This is a picture of Frank Lloyd Wright's studio where he'd have his students come in and they would show off their work and they would do critiques. I did a lot of those critiques when I was working on Google Analytics. And that experience taught me a lot because you would go in there and I would see this happen week after week. Designers would come in and say, here's my proposal for how we should do these things. And there'd be a room full of engineers that would literally just sort of felt like this, right? They would say, here's my idea, and the engineers would just shoot it down with opinion after opinion after opinion. And I didn't want that to happen anymore when we started our own company, excuse me. So we started something a little bit different. We stopped calling it design review and instead called it product review. This meeting we had as optional attendance, but mandatory participation. If you were at the meeting, you were there to work, and we were there this was the opportunity for us to come together and actually solve the problems in, like I said before, a very, very structured way. This is not a forum for expressing opinions. And this is super important, right? Because expressing an opinion about somebody's work is one of the easiest ways to shut them down about the work that they have done. Let me give you an example of what I mean. So a bad thing to say in one of these product meetings is, I don't like that blue. Much, much better is to ask an open question to the person who did the work about the decision that they made. Why is that blue? And even better is to elevate it and to say, is color important here? Why are you making the decisions that you're making? And to get that out of people. Far, far better than just critiquing the work the way that we imagine design critiques have always worked. The other thing that we found was to be very, very explicit at the start of each session in these meetings about whether the meeting would be a convergent meeting or divergent meeting. Let me tell you what that means. A divergent meeting means we are there to find as many possible solutions as we can for the problem that we have defined that we want to solve. So that means we're doing brainstorming. No idea is a bad idea. Everything that comes out, we use that sort of trick from improv where you never ever say no, right? If you're doing improv and you're saying, wow, there's a lot of people on this bus, and your partner says, not really. You're done, the scene is done, right? So if you always say yes and then add on top of it, that is divergence. That is where we have this problem, how might we solve it? And we just collect as much information as we can. That's a very different process than if somebody had been taking all of these ideas and winnowing and testing and iterating their way down into what they propose to be a final solution. That's where we need convergence. That's where we need the whole team to stop brainstorming, stop trying to expand the scope of ideas, and in fact, get us down to evaluating the feasibility of the thing that we're looking at and acknowledge what all the constraints are and drive us towards consensus for the solution that the person or team has been working on. So many meetings go so off the rails because we do the wrong thing at the wrong time, where we have somebody who has been working and iterating, trying to get to their solution, but generally somebody with more power than them in the organization is still brainstorming and saying, well, why don't you try this, or why don't you try this? So being very clear at the beginning of each one of these product reviews, whether we are diverging, looking for more ideas, or converging, trying to get to consensus. Incredibly freeing, and again, creating that sense of psychological safety where people feel free to be able to be as creative as they can with any idea without the repercussions of the team coming back to them. By creating structure, by helping people understand where they are. Now, making teams better and better at this comes in two ways, I have found. The first way, getting exposure to users. Right? It's one thing to improve your product by doing usability testing and seeing where people fail or have missed expectations for the interfaces that they're using. But wow, when people sit and watch those videos or sit and watch them happening, the more exposure, the better their design instincts become because their design instincts for how to solve problems in the product come from a place of empathy. Because they saw somebody struggle with the thing they had made or had at least contributed to making. And that makes people want to fix it for somebody else so they don't have that experience. So the more that we can put our entire teams in front of the users who are trying and grappling with the products, the better their design instincts will be, the better they will be in these product reviews when we are solving these problems. The other thing I've seen is that exposure to great work creates a better design vocabulary. So we were essentially a font company, but I had engineers who had for 10 years previously been the sort of close to the metal, wearing the pager sort of engineers. We brought everybody into the conversations about the aesthetic qualities and the technical merits of all the fonts that we were bringing in. The more we could expose them to great work, the more that we could say, look at the websites that our customers are making and let's critique and evaluate those websites to understand who is being successful at that, the better vocabulary everybody had for being able to talk about design. So vocabulary and empathy, two key things that help everybody have better contributions in the product reviews. All of this building up to a sense of the team having really good taste. And I think good taste, actually, I mean, there's a lot of connotations when you say good taste. You can think of it as almost a thing that you are inherited with, like class or something like that. I'm from America, so I don't believe in any of that. I think good taste is definitely something that you can learn, that you can strive for, and you can teach teams to have better and better taste. All right, so the last meeting is the one we never like to have, and that is the postmortem. The evaluation of what has happened when we have had some kind of outage or problem. I use this image of the sort of very technical industrial process because a lot of our understanding of the systems, even in our digital world, and the failure of those systems can come from the process that came out of the manufacturing revolutions of the past. But the systems we use now are incredibly dynamic and incredibly iterative, right? We're pushing code multiple times a day. And many people do it continuously, literally continuous integration, continuous deployment, which means that there's constant change happening in the systems and on our live services so that at any moment, somebody can push a button fully intending to send an improvement to our systems, but in fact, send an outage. And what happens when that happens? Well, our inclination as humans is to look for a villain. In fact, this is so well documented that it's known by this term, the psychological term of the fundamental attribution error. And what that means is, in a time of crisis, when something goes bad, our inclination as humans is to say, who did it? Who's responsible? Why did they do that? And frankly, we have a strong desire to punish that person. And that happens in groups all the time. Who did this? The fundamental attribution error means that we look at the attributes of a person to understand their motivations rather than the circumstances they were operating in. And if we shift that in our teams, in our groups, from looking for blame to understanding circumstances, we can help identify what those circumstances were that led to the problem and correct those rather than simply punishing the person that found themselves in that circumstance. A lot of this comes from the work of this man. His name is Sakichi Toyoda. He was largely credited with a lot of the process and manufacturing improvements that happened in Japan to help rebuild their industrial economy after World War II. He came up with this process of very simply asking why, and asking why 5 times until you get to the root problem. It's called the 5 whys. And here's a good example of it. I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but I read about this situation that happened with Jeff Bezos visiting one of Amazon's distribution centers, and the assembly line was down, or the conveyor belts were all down. Nothing was happening, and he asked why, and they said because an employee had injured their thumb. So he gets out the whiteboard, and he's like, well, let's get to the root cause here. Why did the employee injure their thumb? Well, it got caught in the conveyor belt. Well, how did that happen? Well, he was chasing his bag. How did that happen? He had put it on the conveyor belt, and it started up unexpectedly, injuring his thumb. Why did he do that? Well, he was using it as a table, because there's no storage space for personal belongings. So getting to the root cause, not that person did something stupid and the whole assembly line is shut down, but rather, if we give people a place to store their stuff, this problem will never happen again. We saw the same thing with the work that we were doing in that outage, right? That Kit Publishing had stalled. Why is that? Because the queue is growing. And why is that? Because the kits were not being delivered. And that was because the origin server was not accepting the kits, because the vendor's origin server is designed for high output, not for high input, because the input rate was not defined as a requirement a year in the past. So again, looking for the set of circumstances that we can correct for, rather than having people constantly afraid that they're going to be blamed for an outage. All by asking why for 5 times. All right, so I have this little bonus thing, which is not even a meeting. It's really the anti-meeting, and that is group chat, as this phenomenon in the last 5 years that I think has fundamentally changed the way that we all work. So how many of you here on a day-to-day basis are using Slack or something like it? Yeah, so sort of remarkable number of people are using this. We've found some really interesting sort of behaviors that happen to teams when they start using Slack, which is that we try really hard. So TypeKit was 60% of the team was in San Francisco. The rest around the world, we had engineers in Copenhagen and Berlin and London, or actually Bristol, and New York and Chicago and all over the place. It required us to have a level of communication so everybody felt engaged that, frankly, every team should have, regardless of whether they're all in the same room or not. And I felt like the really explicit sort of typing out of what was happening with the company into the chat room made that really effective. It also causes this sort of communication compression, which I really, really like. How many of you, let me see here, how many of you could get an email from your boss? It's like a paragraph long saying, we need to do this, and I need you to do that, and we think this, and what is your opinion? How many of you could write back to your boss in that email with just this answer? Would you feel comfortable doing that? And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that email feels like documents. You open a new window, feels like you should write a salutation, that you should include a greeting and check how they are, and boy, the weather is funny, and on and on. We write these paragraphs, we write correspondence, and it's a letter. That changes in chat. Chat is so much more democratizing. We have conversations like this all the time, where everybody is accessible at the times that we decide we want to be, and work can get done quickly, without an exchange of documents requiring that to happen. I think that's really impressive. The other thing I think is really impressive is this notion of the bots that we are creating. We created a whole set of integrations into Slack that connected Typekit into all of the systems that we use to do our work and made sure the only place to get the output of those systems was in the chat room, which fundamentally changed where we sort of congregated. And these are things that I call ambient accountability. And that means doing things like code deploys and pull requests and support tickets and all the revenue events and all that kind of stuff. When people are doing their work, the output of their work is showing up in a group area where people can give them allocates, where they can say, hey, wow, you've been working on that for a long time, great job. And we do that, of course, with all of the latest animated GIFs, right? So that when you have been working for a long time and you finally push that pull request out and it goes live on the server and you go into the chat room and people are genuinely happy for you and it comes like this. And then if you do something really, really good, you get the sort of ultimate in acknowledgement, the Chuck Norris thumbs up. You can't do better than that. We might think these are a little frivolous. I think they're a fundamental part of culture of a team. Because what I see them as is what I like to call micro appreciations. It is emotionally expensive to go over to a coworker and to look them in the eye and say, I really appreciate what you did, and I'm glad you're part of this team. Thank you. We should do that. We're taught to do that. And that's a good thing to do, but we don't do it every day. And it's hard to do. And like I said, it is expensive. But this disintermediated sort of culture that's emerging through reactions in chat rooms, I think breaks that down into things that we share with one another continuously every day, and it makes for better teams. And again, that sense of safety. So all of these meetings are sort of I see them as a sense of momentum that happens over time. And I really like to think about momentum and pacing when I talk to startups in my job now. That we measure this day-to-day momentum and really acknowledge it, right? That was a good week and we had a lot of progress and the numbers are looking good. We do this kind of stuff continuously, but then we zoom out a little bit and we measure projects that we're working on in weeks. And we say, like the next milestone is going to get us to that minimum viable feature. That we measure our priorities more in months, and we say things like, we're going to focus on performance and distribution in the next quarter, whatever they are. We zoom out even farther, we start to talk about vision, right? The purpose for what we're doing here. We measure that in years. Think about Google's vision, to organize the world's information, to make it universally accessible. That may never end. They may continuously be working on this ultimate vision. But I think there's something even farther, even beyond this notion of a vision for what the company wants to do. And I think it encompasses all of us and all of the work together. And we really see it, right? When you take a vision that a company has and that every individual employee and the tasks they're doing every day are able to take their work and connect it up to that vision and understand how they are contributing to it, well, that gives them this sense of purpose. And purpose, I think, is timeless. I think purpose is something that goes beyond even what we're doing today. It reminds me of a study that I read about in Japan around this notion of what's called ikigai, which I'm sure I'm pronouncing terribly, but the idea is that people with this ability to say, here's how the work that I do connects to this bigger vision. That is why I am excited to do that work. That people who could identify that in this incredible study that went over decades with tens of thousands of people, they lived longer, fewer cardiac events, right? The life expectancy they were able to measure to the degree to which people were connected to a purpose in their work. We see this around the world in all cultures, right? In the raison d'etre, in the divine will of the Judeo-Christian worldview, in the Eastern worldview of nirvana, this idea of being connected to something larger over and over. It reminds me of a story that I have read to my children. Winnie the Pooh, the good original one, not before Disney made it all weird. There's this bit in the original story where Piglet asks Winnie the Pooh, when you wake up in the morning, what is the first thing you say to yourself? And the bear says, what's for breakfast? And then he asks Piglet, what do you say? And Piglet says, I wonder what's going to happen that's exciting today. And then Winnie the Pooh says, that's the same thing. But what's going to happen exciting today? This sense of, oh my gosh, I know how the work that I'm doing connects to this bigger purpose, and I'm surrounded by people that I trust and I feel safe with. That bigger purpose is something that I find insanely motivational. I think about it like this. There are probably a bunch of different ways that we can attribute to the success of our species, right, as humans. There's probably commerce is one of them. Agriculture, people say, was the reason we were successful at creating a civilization. But I like to think of our success as directly connected to literacy, which is the ability to take an idea and have it teleport or even time travel. That I can have an experience and I can learn something, and if I write it down and share it, that it can escape my surroundings and persist beyond even my life. And that so much of our technology that we all work on every day is about making that more and more optimized, making it easier and easier for people to have experiences and share them as a way of connecting us all together so that we don't have to learn everything ourselves. We can learn from what other people do. I mean, this room that we're all sitting in right now is a perfect example of this idea of collecting knowledge and disseminating it. That's what they did. This is that room. It's amazing. We've gotten better and better at it. And in fact, a generation ago, we made this huge leap when we let go of the physical representation and made everything abstract into bits. But I think even more important to our sense of literacy and our sense of success as a civilization was when we made it personal. When we took the power of being able to share and communicate with one another and put it in the hands of everybody. And every time, I've seen this now in 20 years of my career, that I think we're about to plateau, like, oh my God, like bandwidth is faster, devices are faster, and they're smaller, we take another leap and we go in another direction, find another way to take what we have experienced and share it with one another. And I think that is the world that we are building now, and we are the people who do that sort of thing for a living. It's a tremendous responsibility, this network that we have built. So I give you that challenge. What is going to make you excited? And who are the people that you're going to surround yourself with that you trust to be able to build this future? So, good luck, and I can't wait to see what you make. Thank you very much.